Let's talk about stateful components. So this morning we created a bunch of stateless components to display some players in our platform. And now I would like to introduce the concept of stateful components. So stateful components are the most complex but important components in React. So generally speaking, most of the time you'll be working with stateless components, but probably 10% of the time you'll be working with stateful components, and that 10% of the time will make the difference probably between good apps and bad apps from an architectural point of view. So I'm not going to explain what a stateful component is. I am just going to present a problem, right? And because of that problem, we'll naturally learn why we need to create a stateful component. So what I want to do is I want to be able to select a player. Why? I don't know, because I want to edit details, I want to delete it, whatever, send an email, doesn't matter, right? But I want to introduce a new mechanism to click on a player, right? So when I click on a player, then I want to do something. I don't know what do I want to do yet, but I would like to handle the click event, right? So let's say that when you select a player, we want to display a message on top saying the player, whoever was selected, right? Something like that. So technically speaking, at the moment, you may be thinking to have a look to the player component that we created in this morning, and then add a click event somehow, right? So whenever we click on the player, then we can do something, right? This is not that simple, right? This is not that simple. Let me try to prototype a bit. So I mean, I'm not going to follow a natural sequence of actions because I know what I want to do, but I'm going to assume I have no idea how to deal with the project, with the issue. So then I'll iterate, right? So I'll do something wrong, and then next step I'll do something a bit less wrong, and eventually I'll do something right, hopefully, fingers crossed. So, do you know how to capture the clicks? On click, that's correct, that's correct. So with React, you can, this is a player, so you can put on click on any element. So then I want to do something. Whenever user clicks on any player, I want to display a console log. You see? Something like that. So this is the syntax for the onClick. So onClick receives a function. So you declare a function. So whenever user clicks on this element, this function will be executed, meaning the console log will be hopefully printed on the right-hand side. Let's see if that's okay or not. You see? Player click, player click, player click, right? And what if we want to display the name of the player where we've clicked on? How do we do that? Props name, like that? What's missing?
No, it has to be curly braces.
Curly braces. This is JavaScript already. Remember, curly braces are necessary when we want to move from HTML to JavaScript. So here, for example, we have the curly braces. But the console log, this is JavaScript already. How do we build a string plus the variable in JavaScript? Backticks.
So backticks.
Yes.
Main.
Correct. So the first thing is we can use plus, right? Right? So that's the classic way, right? So now if I click on the user, you see, Peter, Mary, and Louis. Fine. But also, as some of you suggested, we can use backticks, right? To make it a bit more elegant. So that's pretty much the same thing, right? Player click, and then the name of the player. Here you go, right? So that's fine. That works. So thanks to that strategy, we've learned how to capture the on-click event. However, what we want is on the main component here, because this is the main component, this is the component that decides which players are rendered and everything. On top here, I want to display a message saying this selected player is, we'll see. But that's what we want to do, right? On top, whenever I click on one element, I want to display Peter here. So in other words, who is capturing the on-click event? Player, right? We agree on that, right? However, who is the responsible to display the name of the player? It's not the player, it's the parent, right? So in other words, let's talk about how to communicate components. So whenever the player selects the player, right? Let's say, so whenever this player is selected, that component should send a message to the app saying, hey, this player has been selected, right? Or let me rephrase that. We want to update the user interface. So whenever the user clicks on one element, we want to update the UI, right? Because we want to change the content, right? So every time we change the user interface because of the interaction of the user, we need to create a stateful component. I'll show you how this works. With React, this is something that Jeff asked this morning. When we create a stateful component, and we'll know it's a stateful component because it's a class, it's not a function, it's a class, we can declare several built-in methods. So render, this is the method that React relies on to display things. But before render, we can declare other methods. I'll show you a couple at least. First of all, this is very important, the constructor. So the constructor, this is a JavaScript thing. Every time you create a class, you can have a constructor. So the constructor is the method that will run when we bootstrap the component. So that's the very first thing, the very first method to be executed. So we can have a console log here. We can do something like that. Right? And now, interestingly, by declaring the constructor, we are breaking the app, right? So look at the error. Every time you create a constructor, React is asking to do that. We need to type super. We'll learn at some point in February what super means. But for now, please remember, you see, to add a reference to the super method at the very first line of your constructor. That's the same thing again, again, and again. So you have to remember to do it. Otherwise, the app will fail, right? And as you can see in the console, hello constructor, yes, that will run immediately, right? So let's start talking about breakpoints. I'm going to open the app.js and I'll try to add some breakpoints. One on line number 12 and one on the render method line number 16. So what's the execution order of the breakpoints, guys? What go first, 12 or 16? 12. Why 12? Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. The constructor, you are both right, is the very first thing that we run, right? So that's the very first one. And then after running the constructor, we'll render. So that happens before anything is even rendered, right? Let's prove the theory. If we refresh the page, oh, so now the breakpoints aren't working, which is completely inconvenient, right? That sometimes happens with Chrome, right? Sometimes breakpoints are ignored. Right, I can do something to minimize the impact. Let me clear the let me clear the cache, see if it works. If not, I'll try to do something a bit more aggressive to solve the problem. So it's reloading. Let's see if now it doesn't capture the breakpoints. So whenever that happens, even though it's not ideal, we can add something called debugger. So you see, if you type debugger in the code, the breakpoints will automatically stop at that line. This is not ideal. It's definitely not ideal because we need to change the code to stop on the breakpoints. But this is because of Chrome sometimes struggles to detect the breakpoints, right? So definitely you can see at least that the constructor runs first and then it runs the render. How many times the render function will be executed? Once, that's correct. By default, render runs once. We'll see in a minute how to change that. But by default, the process is, first of all, set up the component by running the construction function, and then run the render function once, and that's it. That's it. That's it, right? Because now we want to update the UI whenever a user clicks on a player, it's the first time that we should start thinking about introducing the state. So the state will be the changing part of the component. So what do we want to change? We want to change that. We want to change the selected player, right? Because we want to change the selected player, I'm going to do something. I'm going to type this.state. I'll show you in a second. So we type this.state, and then state is generally speaking an object, even though that's not strictly speaking necessary. Yes, correct. And then we initialize the state. So the state, here we put all the properties, all the values that will change at some point. So we said that we want to change the selected player, no problem at all. Let's create a new variable, selected player, right? And then, because that's an object, we should initialize it to any value. For example, an empty string. Not necessarily an empty string, but just an example, right? So what that means? That means that because now we have declared an state, we can use it in the render function. In here, I can display the selected player by simply typing this.state.selected player. You see? So now, whatever the selected player is, that will be displayed. At the moment, we get nothing because the selected player is an empty string. But if we put here Usain Bolt, right, that's get displayed, right? So then we see the relationship between the constructor and the render function. On the constructor, we initialize the state. And on the render function, we just display whatever the value of the state is. Any question? No? Right, so that's the first part. However, now, we don't want to leave that selected player Usain Bolt, right? Let's clean up. Let's tidy up a bit. We want to dynamically display the name of the selected player. That's the tricky part. How do we send a message from player to the app telling, hey, a new player has been selected, please update the value of that variable? How do we do that?
We use set state.
Set the state where?
On the how to create this.
Constructor state.
Sorry, say it again, Bala? Maybe it wasn't Bala. Someone was on the other side of the line.
That was me. I said this constructor this state.
Yeah, so but we did that on the constructor, right? So on the constructor, we initialize the state. So that's okay as a first step. But eventually, after 30 seconds, the user may click in one player, so we may want to change it.
So you set it on the click.
You set it on the click. Yes, correct. So essentially, the idea is, this is very important. On every player, look what I'm doing now. I'm going to create a new property called, for example, on player selected, right? And here, the idea is, whenever a player is selected, I will invoke a function to update the selected player, right? So I'm going to create a new function here called set selected player, right? Another function will receive the player name. So then in here, as some of you, as I think Bala and Daniel suggested, now we can update the state. Generally speaking, the very first time you try to update the state in React, you do that. This dot state dot selected player equals player name, right? Because you have an object, so that's generally speaking the way you update the value of a property in the object, right? But that's not correct. This is not how React works. If you want to update the state after it has been initialized, you cannot do that. The way to do that is invoking a method that comes with React called setState. So with setState, you provide an object, generally speaking, and then here you declare which property of the state do you want to update. So what's the name of the property we want to update?
Selected players.
Correct, selected player, correct. And what's the value of what's the new value of selected player? Player name, correct. That's correct. That's correct. So, what that means? What that means is, whenever we invoke the set selected player with a new player name, React will update the state. So the state will change from empty string to whatever player name is. Yeah? But now, this doesn't work, right? We got some problems here, right? So, why this doesn't work? So let's have a look to the errors. Look, expression expected, line number 32. So on player selected, what do we want to do on player selected? So here, we'll receive the player name, hopefully. And then what? Correct. Correct. Set selected player. And what do we put inside of the parentheses? Player name. So the player, right, is offering the name of the player, which is a bit redundant because you have the name here, right? But anyway, let's do it like that. So you have the player name, and then we can pass it there, right? However, this doesn't work. Look at the error. Set selected player is not defined. This is a very important principle in React. Whenever we have a stateful component like this one, every time you want to invoke a function like that one, you should remember to put a prefix here. This dot. Right? We'll learn about all these things. We'll learn what this means, where is that coming from. But for now, remember, every time you create a new function inside of a React class, if you want to invoke it, you need to use this prefix. Right? So then, do you think will it work? What happens if I click anywhere here? Will it work or not?
It's just the main feature, isn't it? Yellow box.
Yellow box. Well, in reality, the event is set on the entire red box. So it shouldn't matter where I click, right? But now the problem is, I created a function, a property here called onPlayerSelected. Is anyone here invoking the onPlayerSelected method? No. So this won't work. I can click, right? We got the console, but the message is not updated. It's not updated because the parent component, the stateful component, is expecting to receive a method called onPlayerSelected. So now, how do we invoke onPlayerSelected from the player component? Do you remember how to access the name of the player here?
So in the function parentheses, you put down the thing you're talking about. This not setting selected layout.
No, you cannot use the state here. Player is a stateless component. Player has no idea about the state of the parent. It's hidden, right? So that's an important principle in React. Only this component has access to the state. The children component, they have no idea about any state. They just understand props. Correct, that's correct. So we can do props dot on player selected. That's correct. How do we pass the name of the selected player here? Props dot name. Correct. 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 Let's see if that works, and then we'll review the logic. So now if I click here, oh, you see? Peter. If I click here, oh, why that happen? On player selected is not a function.
Yeah, because on app you put it within detail.
You put what? Sorry, say it again.
So you see on line 32,
Yeah.
you put the function only within Peter, not the whole.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. So he's completely correct. We added on player selected on Peter, but we forgot to add it again on Mary and Luis, right? So simply just copy and paste it to make sure that every player has the same signature, right? And then of course on Mary as well, right? Does it make sense? Right. So now hopefully we'll be capturing the on player selected event on any player. So Peter, it works, no surprises. Mary, it doesn't blow up this time, which is promising. We got Mary here, right? And then Luis, if we click on Luis, it works as well, right? Because I'm a bit lazy today, and I don't want to keep scrolling up and down, and I know this is a bit off topic, let's stick the selected player message on the very top of the screen. So how can we do that? Well, we can add a div. We can put the content of the selected player inside of the div, and then we can add a class name called, I don't know, selected player message, for example, right? So then I can open app.css, and then I can do selected player message. How do we stick the selected player message to the top? I want this to be floating on top of the screen. What? No. Position what? Position float. No. No, wrong. We learned that. Task number 5, overlays. No, wrong. Wrong.
Anchor.
Wrong. Absolute. Who said absolute? Megan. Extra points for Megan. Right. Absolute. And then what else? If we want to stick it to the top of the screen. No. We don't care about relative because we want to literally stick it on the very top of the viewport, right? So we don't need any parent element. Just put it on top of the screen, right? So can we do that? Top 0, left 0, width 100%, right? We can even have a padding of 30 pixels. We can even have a background, color, green. We can change the color to white, things like that, right? Not green, probably blue. Yeah, but yeah, perfect, right? So that means now if I click Peter, yeah. But now, question: Megan will get the points, but even though she'll get the points, the answer is not right. Why? Because even though that sticks on top of the screen, look at what happened when I scroll down. Oh, It's correct. I didn't want that, right? I wanted to have the blue box visible all the time. So what do we need to change to make sure that the blue box is available all the time?
Top minus 100.
No, top minus 100. No, 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 no. If we put top minus 100, they will be hidden forever. Right? No, 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 no. Position fix. Daniel is right. With position fix, fix is pretty much the same as position absolute, but the difference is if we scroll, whoa, right? You see? So that's pretty cool, right? Because now I can click on Mary. Here you go. I can click on Louis. That's it. Right? That's cool. Yeah. Let me reduce the padding just for, readability purposes. Yeah. So now that looks good, right? So that's pretty much the process of creating a stateful component. Let's recap. So what I did essentially was, on the main stateful component, I created a state. The state will have the properties that we want to change depending on the user interaction. And then we talk about communicating components. So now the player will send a message to the parent whenever a user is selected, right? So the player will capture the onClick event. So whenever the onClick event is triggered, it will send a message to the parent, which is the app, like, hey, please, I know that my player has been selected. Now it's up to you to decide what to do. So the app, which is the parent component, will say, no problem at all. I know how to deal with that. Because I know that you have selected a new player, I'll invoke this function that will essentially update the state. Very important. Every time we invoke setState, the render function will be executed again, which makes sense, right? Why do we update the state? Because we want to update the user interface, right? That's why this is the convention. Every time you call setState, render will be executed. In other words, let's add some breakpoints. You love that. Right? Oh, look, now breakpoints are working, right? So we got lucky. Chrome, now suddenly start working. So I'm going to add some breakpoints. Let me think about the lines. So line number 12, line number 18, and line number 23. And now I'll tell you my user interaction. So I'm going to refresh the page and I'm going to select Mary, right? So after performing these actions, right? So can you tell me, see if I can show you all the breakpoints. Oh, look at the cursor. Oh, okay. Yeah, so, oh, that's weird, right? It's like frozen. Oh. Right, I cannot minimize that window. Here you go, I found it. Cool, brilliant. So, yeah, let me rephrase the question. I'm going to refresh the page, then I'll select Mary. So I want you to tell me the breakpoints that will be triggered from the beginning to the end. So, for example, let's start with Ashley. Okay, let's leave it there. Is Rich listening? Richard?
Oh, yes. Hi.
Hi. Can you tell me the execution order, please?
So I'm having trouble with the screen at the moment.
Oh.
Back to you.
Okay. Who else is on the other side? Bala?
Hi. I'll give it a go. 12.
Yep.
23.
Yep.
Then it goes and gets the data, then invokes the set state. 18.
Yep.
Then renders again. 23.
Yep. Anything else?
That's all I can see with my limited knowledge. It's been really, fast for me, the whole thing.
Right. Is there? Thank you, Bala. Is there any other approach? So we got Mo on the other side of the line. We got Dave. We got Jonan. We got Aisel as well. Also here. Is there anyone else thinking?
Yeah. So Mo speaking here. So say the Bala, but without the 23 at the end.
So
12,
Mo
23, 18.
12, 23, 18. Right, let's leave it there. Anyone else?
I'm agreeing with Bala.
So Daniel agrees with Bala. Jaff, well, Jaff also, quite a lot of people. So Bala is the influencer of the session now, right? So, right. So, and actually you are right, guys. Bala is right. Why Mo is wrong? Because according to Mo, they all agree on the first 3 steps, right? So we'll do the constructor first. Okay, then we'll render, okay. Then once we click on a player, we'll go to line number 18 to update the state, fine. But the problem on most solution is that after updating the state, we mentioned a couple of minutes ago, after updating the state, we will re-render, because otherwise the change won't get applied into the screen, right? So every time you invoke set state, we'll re-render. Let's see if that's correct or not. So, refresh. 12, correct. Then 23, correct. And that's it. But now I will click on Mary. Oh, you see, 18. And now because we invoke it set state, 23, you see? Now, if I hover selected player, look, or don't look, yeah, you see, if I hover selected play is Mary, because we literally just updated it, right? Any question? No? That's pretty much the process of creating a stateful component. Remember, we'll be creating a stateful component whenever we want to update the user interface depending on the user interaction, right? One more question. What happened if I put a console log, this .state.selected player, and then, so before updating state, you know I'm not a big fan of console logs, but just for testing purposes. So I'm adding 2 console logs before and after updating the state, right? Before updating the state, this is the state of selected player. After updating the state, this is the state of selected player. I get rid of the breakpoints. So now, my question is, if I select Peter, can you tell me what the console logs will return?
Going by the same logic, empty before and Peter after?
Empty before, is that Bala?
Yes.
So Bala says empty before and Peter after. What do you think, guys? Right. This is. So this is expected to happen, but that's not correct. That's a classic problem whenever you start working with React. I'll show you. I'll select Peter. You see? It's empty in both cases. The first one was expected, but why is empty on the second one? Even worse. Even worse. There are 2 points for whoever gives me the answer. What happened if I click on Mary? What are the selected players before and after setting the state? Empty, empty. So this is Jaff. Who else? Ashley. All right. Is there any other opinion? That's not correct.
Empty, empty.
No, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. What's the current? Say it again.
I think it's going to be Peter and Maria.
Peter empty. Okay.
Peter and Mary. Wrong.
Peter empty.
Peter empty. Let's put that. Peter empty.
Empty Maria.
Wrong. Keep trying, guys. It's none of that. 2 points for whoever gives me the right answer.
Empty Maria.
Empty Mary. Wrong.
How about empty Peter?
Empty Peter. Empty Peter.
No, Maria.
Wrong. Empty, empty. Wrong.
Undefined empty.
Wrong.
Let's try to Maria.
Undefined.
Mari, Mari. Wrong. Undefined, undefined. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We're all wrong, right? I'll get the points this time. So, I'll show you first of all what will this return. Yes? Peter, Peter. Right? It's Peter, Peter. Why Peter, Peter? Interesting. It's weird. It's a bit mind-blowing. But this is the type of problems you'll be facing at the time that you start working with React. That's why it's very important to understand how the flow works here. So, what's the current state of the component? So what's the current selected player at the moment?
It's Mary.
No, it's not Mary. I click Peter. Look at the top of the screen. Selected player is Peter. So at the moment, for sure, line number 18 will display Peter. Anything else is just doesn't make any sense, right? But the first thing will be Peter. Then if I click on Mary, again, that's you know, that makes sense, right? I click Mary, so that before we get Peter, and then we get Mary. But that's wrong. That's wrong. I'll show Peter twice. I'll show you, and then I'll explain why. If I click on Mary, you see, as Jeff suggested, we display Peter twice. Why? The reason is because set state is asynchronous. So that means that it takes a while to update the state, right? That's why here on line number 20, even though we try to update the state one line above, unfortunately React is not ready for that yet. It may take a few milliseconds, right?
I have a quick question, Ricardo.
Yep.
So the state we're talking about here, so on the left, you know, is on the server side, is it?
No, this is client side. There is no server at all here, Bala. It's purely front end.
Well, all of JavaScript code is running on a Node.js server, right?
But no. I mean, there is a Node.js server to offer the website, but this is purely client side. This is purely JavaScript running on the browser, Bala. There is no Node.js. We'll start introducing Node on task number 18. But there is nothing about Node yet. It's purely JavaScript, purely front-end, UI, browser.
Right, so even on the browser side, this is asynchronous.
Yeah. JavaScript is asynchronous, right, by definition. And this is a good example. Set state may take a while to update the state, right? So technically speaking, can we do that? I never try to defend that. I'm just asking if, technically speaking, you think that, for example, now the state is an empty string. If I select Peter, do you think it will display Peter after 2 seconds? Let's try. It will work. That will work. 1, 2, Peter. Right? But that's bullshit. Never do that. Because someone will say, hey, 2 seconds, that's too much, right? Let's reduce it to 20. Why not? 20. Or 27, then no one will change that, right? Because that looks something very important, 27 milliseconds. Or someone will say, no, that's not enough, 20 seconds, right? So one of the basic ways to differentiate a good developer from a bad developer is set timeout. Never use set timeout. Unless you, I don't know, want to display a message after 20 seconds, unless you clearly want to force an update after that period of time, but that will be probably 1% of the cases. So generally speaking, never ever use set timeout to delay things, right? Because that proves that you don't have control on the flow of your application. You know how I call that? Set timeout. So this is the Piccadilly line pattern. I made this up, right? You know why I call that the Piccadilly line? Do you know how deep Covent Garden is? It's 140 meters. It's the deepest tube station in Europe, the second one in the world after the one in North Korea, right? Why Covent Garden is so deep? Because it's 150 years old. At that time, apparently London, they didn't have floor plans of the buildings and the area, because they didn't know if by creating the tunnel they were going to go through any property. They said, okay, let's do it very, very deep, and then, it will be fine, right? That's bullshit, right? That doesn't happen anymore, right? So with the set timeout, it's the same thing. Because you don't know how long it will take to update everything. You just wait 20 seconds, and hopefully, after 20 seconds, your app will be ready to perform further actions, right? Don't do that.
Okay, I have a question here.
Yeah.
So, as far as the browser goes and the application goes,
Yeah.
it has been synchronous, right? As soon as we clicked, we got the value. It was empty, Peter. Then Mary and all that.
Yeah.
So this is the asynchronicity is just for the console log accessing that value.
No. The asynchronicity is on the set state. We invoke the set state function, but under the hood, React will take a while to complete the transaction. Will take a while.
That's my question, because if set state didn't work and it wasn't synchronous, then it wouldn't have displayed on the screen immediately. So it's obviously working in the browser synchronously.
Yeah.
And only when console.log is trying to access that value, that's when it's getting a delay in accessing that value. So that's the bit I'm sort of struggling to understand.
So what was the question exactly, Vala?
So it seems synchronous on the screen, on the browser.
It seems synchronous.
Because without set state, setting the value, we wouldn't have seen the value on the browser. Right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so that was synchronous.
Yes.
So it's only when we try to access it using console.log.
No. It's not of the console log. Listen, even though on the browser it looks synchronous, it's not actually. So when I select a player, it looks synchronous, but it's not. It may take maybe 100 milliseconds to update, so it's not synchronous. It looks synchronous, but it's not, right? So in other words, set state will take a while to update the state. And once the state is effectively updated, then React will regenerate the UI by invoking the render function. But this is asynchronous.
But if that's the behavior, it can be erratic sometimes, right?
Well, that's the thing. It can be erratic unless you have a very good control on the flow, and that's what I want to explain now. So, okay, we know that this is wrong. We shouldn't do that, right? Because even though it does the trick, this is out of control, right? This is crazy. So the question is, how do we display, if we want to do, imagine that we actually want to do a console log of the selected player, right? How do we do that? Well, we set the state. It can receive a second argument. Let me move that to a new line for readability purposes. So we can pass a new argument, which is a callback function. Could be ES6 function, could be classic function, whatever, right? So the way this works is we tell React, please change the state, and then React will automatically invoke the callback function whenever the state is effectively updated. So that means that that line 22 will run after the state is updated. So if we need to trigger any action after we update the state, that's the way we do it. So let's repeat the exercise again. We have two console logs. We can get rid of the prefix, right? So let's just display the before and then after, right? Before and after.
Quick one here. So wouldn't the asynchronous behavior be the same with the constructor as well then?
No, the constructor is synchronous, right? That's why sometimes it's a bit complicated to determine the synchronicity of your app, right? I agree on that, yeah?
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, so, right? So then, if I refresh the page, what's before and what's after?
Empty and Peter.
Empty and Peter.
Peter and Murray.
No, listen. I'll refresh the page. So, empty and Peter. That's correct. Let's refresh. So now, as soon as I click, you see? Before empty, after Peter. You can probably notice it takes like a few milliseconds. Look, pay attention to the console. You see, it's not immediate. It's almost immediate. It's just from a human point of view, it looks immediate. But from a machine point of view, it's not. Right? So that was pretty much it. There's just one more thing I wanted to explain. Is there any questions so far? Yeah. Why can't we put it on the render? We can. Technically speaking, we can. We can put the console log on the render. But the problem is, the render function will be executed several times. We don't have control how many times the render function is executed. React may decide to invoke the render function multiple times depending on the data model, right? Because of that, the render function is very useful to display things. But never ever do business logic here. So never do console logs on the render. Never invoke the backend. Never invoke a REST API. Never try to get something from the database. Never ever. Render literally just to put HTML. The simpler, the better, right? If you need to do any logic, if you need to create any algorithm to sort an array, to use map, reduce, do it outside of the render function. And that was actually what I wanted to explain as the very last thing of the day. So we know we have the constructor, that's the first thing. We have the render, that comes next. But there is another very important method. There are lots, I think there are 10 or 12 methods. I'm not going to explain them all. But there is another one which I believe is particularly interesting, which is, maybe you heard about that, component did mount. So I use that method a lot. So that method will run once the component has been rendered. So at this stage, the component is already visible. So what kind of actions do we do here? Anything. Here I invoke the backend. Here I sort arrays. Here I blah, 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 blah. Lots of different actions, right? So whenever you want to create the logic of a component, the component did mount is a good method. Why can't we put it here? Well, we can put it in the constructor, but to me, in my opinion, the constructor is helpful just to initialize, to set up, right? So here, the constructor should be very simple. Here you declare, you tell your colleagues what the state of the component is and what's the default value of that state, right? And then if you need to do some tricks on top of that, then you can do them on the component did mount. So, very last question. If I put a console log, right, I'll go back to the previous set of breakpoints. Let me see if the breakpoints work or not anymore. You see, now the breakpoints don't work anymore. That's absolutely ridiculous, right? So let me try to force Chrome to get the breakpoints. Maybe. Right. 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 Now it's not rendering the breakpoints anymore. But let me add some debugger, which is 1, 2, 3, and then 4, right? So I'm adding 4 breakpoints, one on each method essentially, right? One on the constructor, one on the component in mount, one on the selected player, and one on the render. So the user journey now is, I will refresh the page and I will select Peter. So can anybody tell me the execution order for the breakpoints?
Constructor.
Yeah, sorry, give me a second, it's out of control. Yes, now. So now, debuggers, lines. Right. You can look at the left-hand side, it will probably be easier to determine the lines, right? So, constructor, so 12, so Jav suggests Jav 12. Then the render 32. Oh.
Then the component did mount and select
17 and 22. That's it?
select component, then render,
32 again.
yeah, then component did mount.
Then component did mount. 17. Like that?
I think so.
What do you think? No, Daniel disagrees. Why, Daniel?
I would say 12. Render.
Yeah?
After that, the set state is
22. Yeah?
and after that, the render as well again.
Right. So Daniel is wrong. Jaff is wrong as well, but Jaff is very close. So let's see why you failed. So first of all, it will run the constructor, right? We agree on that, no problem at all. Then we'll render first. 32, fine. Then, that's the difference, right? That's the difference. So, Daniel suggested that the set selected player will run, but that's wrong, because as soon as the component is rendered by the first time, only by the first time, the component in mount function will run. So that means that after 32, 17 will run. Then we'll click on Peter, and that will obviously make 22 to be stop here, right? And after running 22, because we are updating the state, we'll have to re-render to refresh the user interface, right? So that's why 32 will run again. So that's perfect actually, but 17 will never run again. So component did mount will run just once. That's important. Will run once after the component is rendered by the first time, and that's it, right? Let's execute that. Let's see if that's correct or not. So I refresh, constructor, correct, render, correct, component in mount. Let me repeat again. Do you notice that the very first time, look, the very first time we run the render, there is nothing on the screen, right? But as soon as line number 17 is triggered, the component should be already visible. You see? Component in mount runs after the component is ready on the screen, right? Which is a good thing. So now, that should be it, right, for now. But if I click Peter, it will run 22, correct? And as a side effect of running 22, it will run 32, and that's it. Correct, nothing else. Questions?
Very nice.
This is the most important workshop on the entire bootcamp, because that's the most fundamental aspect on React. Creating a class, declaring several functions, and be able to communicate different components using callbacks like that, right? So I understand this is not the most trivial thing you've ever done, but please try to replicate the similar example, deal with different components, stateful components, stateless component, communicate components, update the state, add breakpoints, you know, all these things. Just do the same thing, right? The good news is React is pretty much this. If you understand that example, you are a React developer. Of course, there are other small things around, but this is the critical part of React, understanding a stateful component. Yep. Mm-hmm. Anything else, guys? Bala, Richard, Jonan, Mo?
Thank you.
No?
Yes, thank
Cool.
you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. The workshop will be available shortly. I'll keep you posted. Thank you, guys. Thank you for watching.
Thank
Cheers.
you.